Thank you to my channel members and Ko-fi supporters that make these videos possible. You can also support me by buying a deck tech on my weekly Tuesday and Sunday streams. More info in the video description. Hello everyone. I am a firm believer that any card can be playable in Commander up to bracket 3. This fact is perhaps what I like most about the format. EDH legitimately gives most bad cards a home where they can actually impact a game of Commander in a meaningful way. Going about getting the most out of middling pet cards takes some effort on your behalf though, and will be the focus of this video. Now first a disclaimer. When I say bad pet cards in this video, I mean in the context of Magic the Gathering as a whole. Consider the ceiling of cards that exist within an eternal card pool like Commander has. After that, it's not too hard to see how something like Grappling Kraken can be considered a bad card despite being just fine in more casual play. This being said, the advice given in this video will still be applicable to even the worst of cards. The first major point to go about enabling your pet card of choice is identifying what type of role it is fulfilling in your deck. Is it removal? A value engine? A threat? Once you find out how you want to use the card in your deck, it's important to now take that category that it belongs to and ensure that no other card outperforms it to a major degree. Let's say you wanted to build around Shield Broker. Well, you can simultaneously consider this a mix of value, engine, threat, and removal because of how flexible theft effects are, but for this example, we'll mostly count it as a threat. If you decide now to run a few different threats for the same cost or cheaper, it's easy to see how your pet card will rot in your hand in favor of those better plays. This is especially true for decks that revolve around a mechanic your pet card focuses on. For example, some of your first ideas might be that Shield Broker would be good in a theft deck. The issue with this though, is if Shield Broker is your pet card, almost any other card in a theft-focused deck, like Agent of Treachery or Control Magic, will perform better than the Shield Broker in most regards, and with a deck full of those, your favorite one is gonna be the worst one, which will no doubt make it feel awful to play. So then, the goal is instead to find horizontal synergies where the card outshines its peers in context, rather than finding vertical ones where it will become outclassed. Basically, build a strong list with a cohesive game plan that rhymes with your pet card instead of one that diminishes its value. Shield Broker has a few of these horizontal synergies. I personally use it in Knesset since Cephalid has been errated to be Octopus so he can cheat into play from the top of the deck, but there's plenty of other use cases. Like proliferation decks can make good use of the shield counter clause it has. If you proliferate enough, the stolen creature can basically be yours forever. The other thing is that Shield Broker isn't like Sower of Temptation. It can leave play and you will still keep the creature you stole. You only give it back if the shield counter leaves. So in a Flicker deck, suddenly Shield Broker performs better than the usually stronger Sower of Temptation. If it's the only theft card in the deck, then nothing will be there to outshine it. And just like that, your pet card now has an incredible home where it not only performs fine, but it also feels good to play. Now, of course, Agent of Treachery would almost always be better in place of Shield Broker for this Flicker example, but the point isn't to make a deck with all the best in slot cards, but to make your pet card shine. A great way to find a deck that rhymes with your pet card if you're absolutely totally lost is to find cards with similar wording to it, and take a peek on EDH Rec to see what synergies those similar cards are popular in. In the case of Shield Broker, the similar card is probably Agent of Treachery, as mentioned before. To find a card with similar wording to yours though, I highly recommend my Scryfall guide to get an idea of how to do such a thing. Now it's important for the support cards for the pet card to be strong to make up for the build-around's weakness. So in Shield Broker's case, if you wanted to go with the Flicker theme, you should probably be on a deck that has a good Flicker plan independent of whether or not you draw the Broker. You also shouldn't then go and run a bunch of dead proliferation cards in your deck that do nothing without the Shield Broker in play. Something like Thrumming Bird would be a bad inclusion, for example, but maybe you could get away with something like Thirsting Roots, which has a floor being a land cycler for 1 mana. The major point I'm trying to make here is make the pet card part of the synergy of your deck, but don't compromise your plan for it. The cards you run are good with your pet card should be good by themselves, not dragging the rest of your deck down. So then, Shield Broker's nice, but it's only one example. So it was now that I asked my Discord for a few cards that they could not make work, and used this exact method to try and find a home for pretty bad cards, to prove that just about anything can be viable up until bracket 3. Firstly is Filthy Stacks player's recommendation of Evolving Door. A lot of people would dismiss this card as a worse birthing pod, which Yeah, it's definitely not a good card when you try to use it in the same way that Pod would be. Notably though, it has a lot of similarities to a card that is viable in Commander, Evolutionary Leap. So naturally, my first piece of advice is I would recommend avoiding both of these cards in a deck that features Door as to not outshine it. So then, Door is weaker than Birthing Pod in the sense that it has a harder time cheating mana and doesn't really have combo lines, and it's weaker than Evolutionary Leap because it's 1 mana more and can only be used if it's tapped, and even then, only at sorcery speed. So it's time to focus on what this card does better than those two cards. For Birthing Pod, Evolving Door checks colors and not mana value. So even if you're paying full price for the spells you find, you can still turn stuff with mana value 0, such as tokens, into actually good cards that cost more than the 1-drops Birthing Pod would give you. As for Evolutionary Leap, you have way more control over what creature you get. So Evolving Door's home is in a tokens deck where you can sack creatures to find a useful suite of 1 to 3 mana 2-color creatures. There is a bonus synergy though. Colorless is not a color, so in a deck that makes a ton of mirror tokens or Eldrazi spawn, you could feasibly get any monocolor creature in your deck for 1 mana, which lowers the deck building restriction for this card by quite a large margin, since a lot of useful cheap cards have only 1 color, making it super easy to weave them into a turn for 1 extra mana. Not to mention Eldrazi, Spawn, and Scions both sacrifice for mana, helping make Evolving's Door extra 1 mana tax not too difficult to pay. Really, the best part about this is that Eldrazi, Spawn, and Scion producing cards are already just very playable already, especially in green. The most notable is Basking Broodscale. If you wanted to make a very strong deck, Basking Broodscale and Rosy Cotton of South Lane make infinite Eldrazi Spawn tokens, and with Door and the Broodscale, you can easily retrieve Rosy, since she's only 1 color. Up until that point, you can have a toolbox plan to help control the game, with a deck full of utility monocolored creatures the deck can fetch for, to help remove things or to protect your combo when you decide to go for it. You can see how this tokeny deck can stand on its own even if you never draw the Door, but when you do, it harmonizes with the rest of the list, despite being dead in most applications. Here, the Door has a solid home as a value engine, since you built around it without making your deck a gimmick. The second card that stood out to me was Yvonne's choice of Blade of the Oni. On the surface, this card is a little overrated, but it's fine on lower power creatures that care about having their stats pumped. Esper Sentinel, Cephalid Constable, and Needle Spectre that are 5/5s with Menace sounds really good. Then I got to thinking about the fact that it turns whatever is equipped to into a demon and changes its color to black. While, in my opinion, the only real notable thing with the type changing is that Raphael can give lifelink to whatever it's equipped to, there's some fun play with the color changing that can be had at bracket 3. Most notably, if you built a Teysa Orzhov Scion equipment deck, you could have a cool combo line with an equip producer like Pure Steel Paladin, where you sacrifice a spirit that is equipped, make a new spirit, because it's a black creature now, and then equip for 0 on that spirit and sacrifice it again. Of course, this is easier to pull off with Darkest Hour or Painter Servant, but once again, it's about making a pet card shine. Besides, between those two, only Painter Servant can be grabbed by Recruiter of the Guard, like the Blade can, and neither can be grabbed by something like Stoneforge Mystic. Not to mention, in these colors, you still gain access to 2 of the cool Power Matters creatures I mentioned earlier. Seems like a good fit for the Blade. That's it for this video, though. Tell me, is there a pet card that you could never get to work in Commander? Let me know down in the comments below, and while you're down there, maybe help someone else out with ideas? If you're stuck, don't be afraid to come check out my Tuesday and Sunday deck review streams. And until next time, bye!